The air in courtroom 4B was a thick, stagnant cocktail of cheap disinfectant, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of human anxiety. It was a sterile, suffocating space designed to bleach the color from hope. Sunlight, fractured by the grimy panes of the tall, arched windows, fell in dusty, indifferent columns upon the worn mahogany of the benches and the scuffed linoleum floor. It was a room that had absorbed a million whispered prayers and a million silent screams, and it offered back only the oppressive hum of its own fluorescent lighting. At the center of this suffocating geometry of judgment, a man sat alone at the defendant's table, a still point in a turning, merciless world. His name was Elias Vance. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit provided by the state, the fabric rough as sackcloth against his skin. It was a costume of contrition he did not feel, for a crime he did not commit. His hands, calloused and strong from a life of honest labor, rested on the table before him, not clasped in prayer or trembling with fear, but lying still, one atop the other. He was a statue carved from endurance. His face, etched with lines of a sorrow too deep for his 34 years, was a mask of placid resignation. But beneath the calm surface, his mind was a raging sea, and his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird beating against the bars of its cage. He was innocent. The simple, profound, and utterly useless truth of it was the only thing he had left. Across the room at the prosecution's table sat the architect of his damnation. Prosecutor Julian Croft was a man who did not simply occupy a space, he colonized it. His suit was tailored, expensive, a sheath of dark wool that seemed to absorb the light and magnify his presence. His hair was perfectly coiffed, a silver-streaked helmet of unassailable authority. He was polishing his glasses with a silk cloth, a small, theatrical gesture of a man putting the final, fastidious touches on a masterpiece. For Croft, this was not about justice, it was about performance. And the conviction of Elias Vance was to be his grand finale, a triumphant aria of prosecutorial brilliance. He radiated an ego so dense it felt like a physical pressure in the room, a low-frequency hum of self-satisfaction. Croft placed his glasses back on his face, the lenses catching the light like twin spotlights. He glanced at Elias, and a smirk, thin and cruel as a razor cut, touched his lips. He saw not a man, but a narrative device, a pathetic, cornered animal whose final desperate yelps would only serve to amplify the power and glory of the hunter. The jury had already returned their verdict. Guilty. The evidence, a mountain of circumstantial coincidences and a single, tragically mistaken eyewitness, had been woven by Croft into an irrefutable tapestry of guilt. Now, all that remained was the sentencing, the final nail. The judge, a weary man named Harrison, cleared his throat to sound like gravel rattling in a tin can. "Mr. Croft," he rasped, his eyes flitting toward the defendant, "does the state have a final recommendation before this court passes sentence?" Croft rose to his feet. The movement was fluid, practiced, like an actor taking center stage. He owned this room. He owned this moment. He let the silence stretch, building the tension, savoring the weight of every eye upon him. "Thank you, Your Honor," he began, his voice a rich baritone that filled every corner of the courtroom. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, to shaping reality with its very vibrations. "The state has, indeed, given this matter considerable thought." He paced slowly before the judge's bench, his polished shoes making soft, expensive sounds on the floor. "We have before us a man, Elias Vance, convicted by a jury of his peers for a crime of brutal violence and calculated theft, a crime that left a good man fighting for his life and a family business in ruins." He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle. For such a crime, the law is clear. The punishment must be severe. It must be a message, a testament that our society will not tolerate such predatory behavior. He stopped pacing and turned, his entire body now aimed at Elias like a weapon. "But it is not merely the crime itself that compels the state to ask for the maximum possible sentence, Your Honor. It is the defendant's conduct after the crime, his absolute, unrepentant, and, frankly, insulting refusal to accept responsibility." A murmur went through the gallery. Croft fed on it. He was an orchestra conductor, and their emotions were his symphony. Throughout this trial, Croft continued, his voice rising with theatrical indignation, we have been subjected to a narrative, a fantasy, a desperate last-ditch fabrication of a man with no other recourse. He took a step closer to the defense table, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, mocking whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. We have been told a ghost story, Your Honor, a tale of a phantom twin. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. Yes, an identical brother, a long-lost evil twin named Damien, who, by the most staggering of coincidences, chose this exact moment to reappear after decades of silence, commit this heinous crime, and then vanish back into the ether from whence he came. Croft spread his hands wide, a gesture of mock disbelief. It is a defense born of cheap fiction and sheer desperation, a story so ludicrous, so insulting to the intelligence of this court, of the jury, of every person in this room, that it borders on psychosis. He pointed a finger at Elias, the tip trembling with manufactured rage. This man does not just ask for your leniency. He mocks you. He sits there, wrapped in a blanket of false calm, and expects you to believe in his imaginary friend, his convenient scapegoat, his phantom, contraband of the mind, Your Honor, a trinket of a desperate soul. Elias did not flinch. He did not look away. He simply met Croft's gaze, his own eyes dark, steady pools of unyielding truth. The prosecutor's words were stones thrown against a cliff face. They struck, and they fell away, leaving the rock unmoved. Inside Elias, however, the storm raged. He felt the heat of shame, not for himself, but for the desecration of his past, the twisting of a painful reality into a punchline. The name Damien was not a fabrication. It was a wound, a scar on his soul that Croft was now gleefully prodding with a red-hot poker for the amusement of the crowd. The state asks for the maximum sentence, Croft boomed, turning back to the judge, his voice reaching its crescendo. 25 years to life, not just to punish Elias Vance for what he did, but to condemn him for the lies he has told, for the contempt he has shown this sacred institution. Let the message be sent that our justice system is not a stage for fairy tales. It is a place for truth. He sat down, the sound of his body settling into the chair, a punctuation mark on his triumph. He looked immaculate, invincible, a god of his own small wooden world. Judge Harrison sighed, the sound heavy with the weariness of his office. He looked at Elias, his expression a mixture of pity and impatience. Mr. Vance, the judge said, his tone flat, you have heard the state's recommendation. Do you have anything to say for yourself before I pronounce sentence? At the defense table, a young woman stood up, her movements uncertain. Sarah Jenkins, his public defender. She was barely out of law school, her suit jacket a size too big, her face pale with the stress of the trial. She had fought, but she had been outmatched, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed by Croft's experience and sheer force of will. Your Honor, she began, her voice thin, my client maintains his innocence. I will hear it from him, Counselor, the judge interrupted, his gaze fixed on Elias. Sarah looked at Elias, her eyes pleading with him to say something, anything that might help, to show remorse, to beg, to play the game. Slowly, deliberately, Elias Vance pushed his chair back and stood. He was not a large man, but he stood with a straightness to his spine that seemed to defy the crushing weight of the room. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at the jury box, now empty. He looked directly at Julian Croft. The courtroom fell into a profound silence. The hum of the lights seemed to amplify. Every breath was held. I am innocent, Elias said. His voice was not loud, but it was clear and steady, cutting through the thick air with the simple, unadorned power of fact. It was a voice that had been scraped raw by grief, but was forged in conviction. I did not do this. He paused, his eyes never leaving the prosecutor's smug face. My brother did it. A gasp rippled through the gallery. It was one thing to hear the defense as a legal strategy. It was another to hear it stated so plainly, so calmly, by the man about to lose his life. Croft's smirk widened into a full-blown grin of condescending pity. He shook his head slowly, a mime of sorrowful disbelief. The boy is delusional, he mouthed to his assistant, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. His name, Elias continued, his voice gaining a sliver of an edge, a hint of the steel beneath the calm, is Damian Vance. He is my twin brother, and he is the man you should be looking for. The dam of Croft's composure broke, not in a flood of anger, but in a cascade of derisive laughter. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud barking sound that echoed unnaturally in the solemn space. It was a performance of ridicule, a public execution of Elias's last shred of credibility. The sound was a violation. It cracked like a whip in the silent room. "Damian!" Croft choked out, wiping a theatrical tear from his eye. "Oh, bravo, bravo! What commitment to the role! He even remembers his imaginary friend's name." He turned to the gallery, playing to them directly. "Perhaps we should put out an all-points bulletin for Casper the Friendly Ghost while we're at it, or maybe the Tooth Fairy can provide an alibi." Laughter, hesitant at first, then bolder, trickled from the public benches. They were taking their cue from the man in the expensive suit. They were siding with the winner. Elias Vance was no longer a man, he was a joke. His life, his truth, was reduced to a spectacle. Judge Harrison banged his gavel, his face flushed with irritation. "Order! Mr. Croft, that's enough!" But there was no real force in it. He, too, saw Elias as a lost cause, his final plea an act of pathetic folly. Croft held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender, his smile never leaving his face. "My apologies, Your Honor. I was simply overcome by the sheer breathtaking audacity of the lie." He looked at Elias, his eyes glittering with triumph and malice. 25 to life, Your Honor. Let him spend the next 2.5 decades telling his ghost stories to the four walls of a cell. Perhaps then he will learn the meaning of truth. Elias felt a cold wave wash over him. It was the chilling feeling of finality. He had spoken his truth, the only thing he had, and it had been laughed at. It had been turned into a weapon against him. He saw the judge picking up his papers, saw the finality in his eyes. He saw the smirk on Croft's face, the look of a predator who had just finished a satisfying meal. He felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. The world was shrinking to the size of a prison cell. Sarah Jenkins sank back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. She had failed. The system had failed. She had looked into Elias's eyes every day for weeks. She had spent countless nights chasing down the thinnest of leads about a twin brother no one had seen in 15 years. The family was gone, parents deceased, old neighbors moved away. There were no records, no digital footprints. Damian Vance was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. But in that moment, hearing Elias's steady voice and seeing the viciousness of Croft's mockery, a certainty settled in her soul, hard and heavy as lead. Elias was telling the truth. The ghost was real. The judge cleared his throat, the sound signaling the end. He was about to speak the words that would erase Elias's future. "Elias Vance, having been found guilty by a jury of your peers of the crimes of aggravated assault and grand larceny." As the judge's voice droned on, sealing his fate, Elias's mind detached. The courtroom, the sneering prosecutor, the weary judge, they all receded, the sounds blurring into a dull roar. He was no longer in courtroom 4B. He was standing on a dusty patch of grass behind a small blue house, the sun warm on his 7-year-old shoulders. He saw his brother, Damian, crouched over a small, trembling bird with a broken wing. Damian wasn't helping it. He was holding a magnifying glass, focusing a sharp white bead of sunlight onto its feathers. Elias could smell the faint, acrid scent of scorching down. He remembered shouting, running forward, and knocking the magnifying glass from Damian's hand. Damian had looked up at him, not with the startled shame of a child caught being cruel, but with cold, appraising eyes. "It's just a dumb bird, Eli," he'd said, his voice flat. "It feels nothing." But Elias had seen the flicker of fascination in his brother's gaze, the thrill he got from the tiny creature's panic. It was the first time Elias had felt a true chill of fear when looking at his own reflection. The memory dissolved, replaced by another. They were teenagers now, 16. A girl, Jessica, had a crush on Elias. She was shy, kind, with a smile that made Elias's stomach do flip-flops. He was too timid to ask her out. Damian, ever the charmer, told Elias he would put in a good word for him. A week later, Elias found Jessica crying behind the bleachers. "Damian, pretending to be Elias, had asked her out, taken her to a secluded spot, and then cruelly abandoned her, telling her she was foolish and naive to have believed him. "I was just teaching you a lesson, Eli," Damien had said later, a smirk playing on his lips as he lounged on his bed. "Never let someone else do your dirty work. Besides, she was boring." He had used their identical faces as a weapon, a tool for his casual cruelty, and had taken pleasure in Elias's pain and Jessica's humiliation. The images kept coming, a torrent of painful memories Croft had dismissed as a fairy tale. The time Damien stole their father's watch and let Elias take the blame, enduring a week of stony silence from the man he worshipped. The time Damien cheated on his final exams by swapping papers with Elias when the teacher wasn't looking, graduating with honors while Elias, who had done the actual work, received a middling grade. Each memory was a small cut, a paper-thin slice of betrayal that had, over years, bled his love for his brother dry, leaving only scar tissue and a deep, abiding wariness. The final memory was the sharpest. They were 19. Their mother had just passed away, leaving them a small inheritance. Elias wanted to use his share to take some community college courses, to build something. Damien wanted to go to the city, to live fast. He had tried to convince Elias to give him his share. "We're a team, Eli. I'll double it in a year, you'll see." When Elias refused, his voice quiet but firm, Damien's charm had curdled into something venomous. The night before Damien left, Elias woke to find his drawer pried open, his half of the inheritance money gone. All that was left was a note. "You were always too slow. The world is for the fast, brother. Don't come looking for me." He had not seen or heard from Damien in the 15 years since. He had become a ghost, a phantom, just as Croft had said. A hole in the world where a brother used to be. Elias had rebuilt his life from the ashes of that betrayal. He had worked, he had saved, he had built a reputation for being quiet, reliable, and honest. And now that phantom had reached out from the past, not with a hand of reconciliation, but with a fist that had shattered another man's face and stolen his livelihood, leaving Elias to stand in the wreckage. The eyewitness had seen his face, a face he shared with a monster. "A blight upon this community?" The judge's voice cut through his reverie, pulling him back to the cold, hard present. He was running out of time. His life was being measured in the judge's syllables. Sarah Jenkins felt a fire ignite in her gut. It was the fire of pure, unadulterated rage. Not at the judge, not even at the system, but at the smirking, self-satisfied man at the prosecutor's table. Croft hadn't just prosecuted a man, he had reveled in demolishing him. He had taken a human being's deepest trauma and turned it into a theatrical prop. She looked at Elias, at the profound, unshakable dignity in his posture, and she knew she couldn't let it end like this. It was a betrayal of her oath, a betrayal of the flicker of decency she still believed the law represented. Risk. The word screamed in her mind. Risk her career, risk being sanctioned for disrupting the court, risk looking like a fool. But what was that risk compared to the certainty of an innocent man being sent to a cage for the rest of his life? The judge paused to take a sip of water, a small reprieve, a breath before the final plunge. It was now or never. "Your Honor," Sarah said, standing up so quickly her chair nearly toppled over. Her voice, no longer thin, rang with a newfound strength. "I request a 5-minute recess. There is one final inquiry I must make." The judge looked at her, his annoyance plain. "Counselor, the time for inquiries is long past. The jury has rendered its verdict." "It pertains to sentencing, Your Honor," she lied, her heart pounding. "A character witness I have just now been able to locate. It is a matter of extreme urgency." Croft scoffed loudly. "Your Honor, this is a mockery, a desperate, transparent delay tactic. The defense is flailing." Sarah ignored him, her eyes locked on the judge. She projected every ounce of sincerity she possessed into her gaze. 5 minutes, Your Honor, for the sake of a just sentence, please." Perhaps it was the desperation in her voice, or perhaps it was a flicker of his own conscience, but the judge hesitated. He looked from Sarah's pleading face to Elias's stoic calm, then to Croft's arrogant sneer. He sighed, a long, rattling exhalation of a man who was tired of it all. 5 minutes, Counselor, he conceded, banging his gavel lightly. "And believe me, they will be the last 5 minutes you get. Court is in recess. The moment the word was out, Sarah was moving. She didn't walk. She fled. She pushed through the swinging gate of the bar, her mind racing. She had one lead, one pathetic, tissue-thin thread she had found 2 weeks ago and had been unable to follow up. An old woman, a former neighbor of the Vance family, who had moved to a retirement community 3 states away. The woman, when Sarah had briefly spoken to her, had been addled, confusing Elias with his father, but she had mentioned one thing of interest. Oh yes, the wild one, Damien. His mother always worried. She kept in touch with her cousin Martha about him, always prayed Martha could get through to him. Sarah had the number for the retirement community. She fumbled for her phone as she burst into the echoing emptiness of the marble hallway outside the courtroom. Her fingers were trembling so badly she could barely dial. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, an eternity. Sunny Meadows Senior Living, how can I help you? A cheerful voice chirped. I need to speak to Martha Prentice, Sarah said, her voice tight with panic. It is a life-or-death emergency. The urgency in her tone cut through the receptionist's professional cheer. One moment. The line clicked. More waiting. Sarah paced the hallway like a caged animal, glancing at the courtroom doors. Her 5 minutes were evaporating. 1 minute gone. 2. Hello? The voice on the other end was frail, laced with the crackle of age. Martha Prentice, my name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a public defender. I'm calling about Elias Vance. His mother was your cousin? Eleanor's boy? Oh, the good one. Yes, such a sweet boy. Is he all right? No, he's not, Sarah said, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. He's about to be sentenced for a crime he didn't commit. He says his brother Damien did it. They're laughing at him. They don't believe him. You were the last person anyone mentioned who might know something. Anything. Please, I'm out of time. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The frail voice suddenly became sharp, lucid. Damien, of course. That boy was always a storm waiting to break. Where is this happening? The county courthouse, room 4B, but they're about to sentence him now. Listen to me, the old woman said, her voice now imbued with a surprising authority. You go back in that courtroom. You do whatever you have to do to stop that judge. Object, yell, faint, I do not care. You buy him time. Someone is coming. Who? How? What are you? Damien never strayed far. He likes to watch. He lives less than an hour from that courthouse. He thinks no one knows. But I know, Martha said, her voice grim. I have his number. His mother made me promise I would always keep it, just in case. I'm hanging up now and I'm calling him. Then I'm calling someone else. You stop that judge. Do you understand me, child? Yes, Sarah breathed, a wild, impossible hope blooming in her chest. I understand. The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen for a second, the dial tone buzzing in her ear. It was insane. A Hail Mary pass based on the word of an old woman hundreds of miles away. But it was all she had. Her 5 minutes were up. In a sleek, minimalist apartment 40 miles away, a man who looked identical to the one sitting in the defendant's box was admiring his reflection. He adjusted the cuff of an expensive shirt, a small smirk on his face. He was thinking about the news report he'd seen. His brother's arrest, the trial. It was perfect. A ghost from the past paying a debt Damien felt was long overdue. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. Annoyed, he answered. What? Damien Vance, a frail but steely voice said. This is Martha Prentice, your mother's cousin. The smirk vanished from Damien's face. He went rigid. How did you get this number? Your mother gave it to me, you fool. She knew you would be the death of your brother one day. They are about to sentence Elias for what you did, at the county courthouse. You have 1 hour to get there and confess, or the recording of this phone call, along with everything I know about your activities for the past 10 years, goes directly to the district attorney's office. Your little life of luxury, built on fraud and deceit, it will be over. But more than that, your brother's blood will be on your hands forever. A choice, Damien. The first real one you've ever had to make. The line disconnected. Damien stood there, the phone in his hand, his face pale. He looked at his reflection again, but this time he didn't see a successful man. He saw a ghost. He saw Elias. And for the first time in 15 years, he felt a sliver of something other than contempt. It was a cold, sharp feeling. Fear. Back in the courtroom, Sarah Jenkins slid back into her seat just as Judge Harrison was retaking the bench, his face a thundercloud. "Your 5 minutes are over, Counselor. I trust you are ready to proceed to the inevitable conclusion?" "No, Your Honor." Sarah stood again, her voice ringing with a conviction that startled the room. "The defense objects." Croft shot to his feet. "Objects? Objects to what? The passage of time?" "Objects to the pronouncement of this sentence," Sarah declared, her mind racing for a legal justification, any justification. "On the grounds of new evidence coming to light that requires immediate review before a just sentence can be passed." "What new evidence?" the judge demanded, his patience utterly gone. "Show me, right now." Sarah's throat went dry. She had nothing. "It is on its way, Your Honor. I have received credible information that exculpatory evidence of a shocking nature is en route to this courthouse as we speak." Croft exploded in laughter once more, a booming, ugly sound. "Oh, this is rich! The phantom evidence for the phantom twin. Your Honor, she's unraveling. This is an embarrassment to the legal profession. I move that she be sanctioned for contempt and that we proceed with sentencing this convicted felon immediately." The judge looked torn. Sarah's desperate plea was irregular, a violation of all protocol. But the wild, terrified certainty in her eyes gave him a moment's pause. It was the slightest hesitation, but it was there. He was about to overrule her, to bring the hammer down, when the world changed. It started not with a sound, but with a feeling. A sudden shift in the pressure of the room, a collective intake of breath from the gallery near the doors. Then came the sound. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B, which had been closed, swung inward with a deafening boom that echoed like a gunshot. The sound was so violent, so final, it seemed to crack the very air. Every single person in the room, from the judge on his bench to the clerk taking notes, jerked their heads toward the back of the courtroom. The room went silent. Not a quiet silence, but a profound, absolute void of sound, as if a vacuum had just opened. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright light of the hall, was a man. He was dressed in a dark, expensive-looking jacket and jeans, a stark contrast to the state-issued suit on the man at the defendant's table. He took one step into the room, then another. As he moved out of the silhouette and into the dusty columns of courtroom light, a wave of audible gasps swept through the gallery. It was Elias Vance, but it could not be Elias Vance. Elias Vance was sitting at the defendant's table, his back ramrod straight, his head slowly turning with the rest of them. The man in the doorway was a perfect, flawless mirror image. The same dark hair, the same strong jawline, the same deep-set eyes. He had the same face, the same build, the same height, but the expression was entirely different. Where Elias's face held a weary, battered integrity, this man's face was a canvas of shock, guilt, and a cornered animal's panic. It was a face that had been sculpted by years of selfishness and arrogance and was now cracking under an unbearable weight. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at the stunned prosecutor. His eyes, wide and haunted, scanned the room until they found the man at the defendant's table. He looked at his brother, Elias, and in that one silent, soul-shattering look, a 15-year gulf of betrayal, pain, and denial was bridged. It was not a look of reunion. It was a look of reckoning. Julian Croft was on his feet, his mouth hanging open. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty waxen mask of disbelief. The smug confidence, the theatrical arrogance, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a raw, sputtering confusion. What is this?" he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What trick is this?" Elias stared at the man in the doorway. He felt no shock. He felt no surprise. He only felt a deep, profound, and soul-crushingly heavy sense of inevitability. The ghost was no longer a ghost. Damien was real. He was here. And the entire world could see him. Elias slowly rose to his feet, his and his brother's eyes locked across the stunned courtroom. Before anyone could react, before the bailiffs could move or the judge could find his voice, another figure stepped through the doorway, moving with a brisk, authoritative purpose. He was a man in a sharp suit, holding a briefcase, his eyes scanning the room with the cold, analytical gaze of a surgeon. He was followed by an older, powerfully built woman whose presence seemed to command instant respect. She was the State Attorney General, Caroline Reed, a woman known for her iron will and intolerance for corruption. The investigator strode to the center of the room, ignoring the judge completely. He stopped beside the frozen form of Damian Vance. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the stunned silence. "My name is Mark Corrigan. I am Chief Investigator for the State Innocence Project. And this," he said, placing a firm hand on Damian's shoulder, "is Damian Vance, the identical twin brother of the defendant, Elias Vance." The statement hung in the air, a fact so undeniable, so physically present that it buckled the very foundations of the room. The murmurs in the gallery exploded into a roar of shock and confusion. Judge Harrison banged his gavel, his hand trembling. "Order! Order in this court!" His voice was thin, reedy, utterly devoid of its former authority. He stared at Damian, then at Elias, then back again, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. Caroline Reed, the Attorney General, stepped forward. Her heels clicked on the linoleum with the sharp report of sniper fire. She walked past the prosecution's table, not even gracing Julian Croft with a glance, and stopped directly before the judge's bench. "Judge Harrison," she said, her voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge of command, "you will vacate the jury's verdict and dismiss all charges against Elias Vance immediately." Croft finally found his voice, a high-pitched, incredulous squeak. "On what grounds? This is a circus, a stunt. This man could be anyone. They could have hired an actor. I object. I strenuously object." The Attorney General turned to face him. The look she gave him was not one of anger. It was one of pure glacial contempt. It was the look a biologist gives a particularly loathsome specimen under a microscope. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "your objection is noted. Your career is over. And if you say one more word before I am finished, I will have you charged with obstruction of justice and removed from this courtroom in handcuffs." Croft flinched as if he had been physically struck. The color that had drained from his face now rushed back in a hot, blotchy tide of humiliation. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on the deck of a boat. He slowly, mechanically, collapsed back into his chair, shrinking into his expensive suit, a man utterly and completely broken. The god of courtroom 4B had been struck down from his throne. Attorney General Reed turned back to the bench, her gaze sweeping over the entire room. "For weeks, Mr. Croft has stood in this court and prosecuted a man based on a single fallible eyewitness account and a mountain of circumstantial evidence that could apply equally to two people. For weeks, he has ignored, dismissed, and openly mocked the defendant's consistent, unwavering claim that he had a twin brother who was responsible. A claim that a competent prosecutor, a prosecutor interested in justice rather than a victory, would have been duty-bound to investigate." She gestured toward Damian, who was now being quietly flanked by two state troopers. "It took my office and the Innocence Project less than 1 hour, following a single phone call from a concerned citizen, to locate Damian Vance. We found him living comfortably 40 miles from here. It took us another 30 minutes upon presenting him with evidence of his own criminal activities to secure a full signed and videotaped confession to the assault and robbery for which his brother Elias was about to be sentenced to life in prison." She held up a folder, tapping it with her finger. In his confession, Damian Vance details how he committed the crime. He also details how he has been following his brother's trial, confident that the man he betrayed 15 years ago would once again pay the price for his actions. It's all here. She then looked directly at Croft, and her voice dropped to a damning whisper. "What's also here, Mr. Croft, is the preliminary report from our investigation into your handling of this case. We've discovered that your office was, in fact, given a lead 2 months ago. A statement from a transient who claimed he saw a man matching the suspect's description, but mentioned the man was bragging about how his look-alike brother would take the fall. You buried that report, Mr. Croft. You classified it as unreliable and never disclosed it to the defense. You didn't want a ghost story messing up your perfect conviction, did you?" The air went out of Julian Croft. He physically deflated, his shoulders slumping, his head bowing. It was no longer just humiliation, it was ruin. He was staring into the abyss of his own making. "This is not just a miscarriage of justice," the Attorney General declared, her voice ringing with cold fury. "It is a deliberate perversion of it, orchestrated by a man more interested in his conviction rate than the truth. It is a cancer in our system, and we are here to cut it out." She turned her gaze to Elias. For the first time, her expression softened, filled with a profound respect. "Elias Vance," she said, her voice clear and formal. "On behalf of the state, I offer you our deepest, most sincere apology. Our system has failed you. You have been subjected to a nightmare. That nightmare is now over." Judge Harrison, his face ashen, fumbled with his gavel. The verdict of the jury is hereby vacated," he stammered. "All charges against the defendant, Elias Vance, are dismissed with prejudice. This court is adjourned." He banged the gavel, the sound feeble and pathetic, and practically fled from the bench. The courtroom erupted. Reporters who had been scenting a story now swarmed. Bailiffs moved to create a perimeter. In the center of the chaos, Elias stood still. The bailiff beside him unlocked his handcuffs. The metal fell away from his wrists with a soft click. He rubbed his skin, not looking at the cheering people, not looking at the flash of cameras. He looked across the room at his brother, who was being led away in handcuffs of his own. Their eyes met one last time. There was no anger in Elias's gaze, no triumph, only a vast, desolate sorrow for the boy who tortured birds, for the teenager who broke a kind girl's heart, for the man who had thrown his own brother into the fire to keep himself warm. Sarah Jenkins was beside him, tears streaming down her face, a radiant smile of relief and victory lighting up her features. "We did it, Elias," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We did it." Elias looked at her, and a small, weary smile touched his own lips for the first time. "No, Sarah," he said softly. "You did it." As investigators from the Attorney General's office began to escort a catatonic Julian Croft from the room, their paths intersected with Elias. Croft, his face a mess of sweat and despair, looked up and saw the man he had so gleefully tried to destroy. He expected to see hatred. He expected to see a gloating smile. Instead, he saw only a quiet sadness. Elias stopped, and the entire procession halted around them. "You," Croft croaked, his voice a dry rattle. Elias looked at him not as a victim to his tormentor, but as a doctor observing a patient. "It was never about the truth for you, was it?" Elias said, his voice quiet, carrying no malice, only a devastatingly accurate diagnosis. "You saw a simple man, and you decided he must be a guilty one. You heard a complicated truth, and you decided it must be a lie. You didn't see me. You saw what you wanted to see. That was your mistake." He held Croft's gaze for a moment longer, letting the simple truth of the words sink in. He offered no forgiveness. He offered no condemnation. He offered only clarity. Then he turned and let Sarah and the investigators from the Innocence Project lead him away, leaving Julian Croft to marinate in the ruins of his own making. He was finally free, walking out of the suffocating darkness of the courtroom and into the bright, uncertain light of the rest of his life. The fallout from the Vance case was not a tremor. It was an earthquake that shook the state's legal system to its very foundations. The story was a media sensation, a modern-day parable of David and Goliath played out in the stark reality of Courtroom 4B. Julian Croft's downfall was as swift as it was brutal. Disbarred within a month, he was then indicted on multiple charges, including suppression of exculpatory evidence and official misconduct. The trial was a formality. The videotaped confession of Damian Vance was damning, but the testimony of the transient whose report Croft had buried was the nail in his coffin. The once arrogant prosecutor, who had commanded courtrooms with his booming voice and tailored suits, was now the one sitting at the defendant's table, looking small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. He was sentenced to 5 years in a state penitentiary, a punishment that was less about the length of time and more about the totality of his disgrace. His name became a cautionary tale in law schools, a synonym for prosecutorial hubris and the catastrophic danger of confirmation bias. The systemic changes were significant, spurred on by the public outcry and the unwavering advocacy of Attorney General Caroline Reed. The state legislature passed a package of reforms. Chief among them was the Vance Rule, a new procedural mandate that required prosecutors to conduct a thorough and documented investigation into any substantive alternative perpetrator claim made by a defendant, particularly in cases relying heavily on eyewitness testimony. Failure to do so would result in automatic grounds for a mistrial. Furthermore, mandatory annual ethics training, with a heavy focus on the psychological pitfalls of cognitive bias, was implemented for all prosecutors and public defenders in the state. Sarah Jenkins, once an overlooked and overwhelmed junior defender, became a central figure in designing this new training. Her quiet competence and unwavering moral courage in the face of overwhelming pressure had not gone unnoticed. She was offered a senior position with the State Innocence Project, where she went on to lead the teams that would exonerate a dozen other wrongly convicted individuals over the next decade. Damian Vance pleaded guilty to the assault and robbery charges. His confession spared the victim the trauma of another trial. He was sentenced to 15 years, the judge showing little leniency for a man who had not only committed a violent crime, but had willingly watched his own brother take the fall for it. In the stark, unadorned world of prison, stripped of his charm, his money, and his ability to manipulate, Damian was just another inmate. The mirror that had been his greatest weapon was now just a constant reminder of the man he could have been, and the brother whose life he had almost destroyed. And Elias? Elias wanted none of it. He refused the talk show interviews, the book deals, the offers to turn his story into a movie of the week. The settlement he received from the state for his wrongful prosecution was substantial, but he used it not for luxury, but for anonymity. He gave a large portion to the victim of his brother's crime, helping the man rebuild his business and his life. He endowed a small fund at the Innocence Project in Sarah Jenkins's name, and then he disappeared. He moved to a small, quiet town in the Pacific Northwest, a place of tall trees, constant rain, and the comforting gray of an overcast sky. He bought a small house with a large workshop out back. He changed his last name. He found work as a carpenter and cabinet maker, losing himself in the scent of sawdust and the satisfying simplicity of shaping wood. He found solace in the quiet integrity of a well-made joint, the honesty of a level line. His hands, which had once lain still on a defendant's table, were now always in motion, creating, building, and repairing. He never spoke of his brother or the trial to the new people in his life. His past was a locked room, and he had thrown away the key. He did not seek reconciliation with Damian. He never visited him in prison, never answered the single letter that Damian sent, a rambling, self-pitying attempt at an apology. The wound his brother had carved into his life was too deep, the chasm between them too vast to be bridged by words. Forgiveness was a country he could not yet find on a map. His peace came not from confrontation, but from distance, from the quiet, daily affirmation that he was his own man, defined not by the face he shared with a monster, but by the work of his hands and the quiet decency of his heart. Years passed. The Vance case faded from the headlines, becoming a footnote in legal textbooks. One cool autumn afternoon, Elias was planing a piece of maple in his workshop, the rhythmic scrape of the tool a form of meditation. A car he didn't recognize pulled up his gravel driveway. A man got out, older now, his suit not as sharp, his hair thinner. He walked with a hesitation, a profound uncertainty. It took Elias a moment to place the face, to drag it from the locked room of his memory. It was Julian Croft. Elias set his plane down, his heart giving a single hard thump. He felt no fear, no anger, only a weary curiosity. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the open door of his workshop. Croft stopped a few feet away, looking not at Elias, but at the ground. He had served 3 years of his sentence and been released on parole. The arrogance had been sandblasted out of him, leaving behind a hollowed-out, brittle shell of a man. "Vance," Croft said, his voice quiet, raspy. I know you don't want to see me. I had to." He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with a haunted, desperate need. "I spent 3 years in a cell thinking about what I did. About you. About that courtroom. I told myself it was the system, that I was just playing the game, but that was a lie. You were right. I saw what I wanted to see. I heard a story I liked, the story of my own brilliance, and I refused to let anything, even the truth, get in the way. He took a shaky breath. I came here to say I'm sorry. I know the words are useless. I know they don't give you back the time you lost, or the peace I stole. But I had to say them. To you. I am sorry. Elias listened, his expression unreadable. He looked at this broken man, this ghost from a past life, and he felt a flicker of something unexpected. Not forgiveness, not pity, just a sense of a circle being closed. What you did to me was wrong, Elias said, his voice as even and steady as it had been in the courtroom all those years ago. But I wasn't your only victim. There was the man my brother attacked. There was the truth. There was the law you swore to uphold, and there was you. You destroyed yourself, Mr. Croft. He picked up a small, intricately carved wooden bird from his workbench. Its wing was outstretched, perfect and whole. Your apology doesn't change what happened, Elias continued, turning the bird over in his hands. Words don't fix things. Actions do. What matters is what you do now, the man you choose to be from this day forward. He didn't offer absolution. He didn't offer a hand of friendship. He offered something harder and more valuable. A path. He placed the wooden bird back on the bench, a silent testament to healing and wholeness. Croft stared at him, the harshness of the truth settling on him, but this time it wasn't a condemnation, it was a directive. He nodded slowly, a single, jerky motion. Thank you, he whispered, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was thankful for. He turned and walked back to his car, his shoulders a little less slumped, his step a little more certain. Elias watched him drive away until the car was just a speck on the horizon. He then turned and went back into his workshop, the familiar scent of cedar and pine washing over him. He picked up his handplane, its wooden handle smooth and worn, fitting perfectly in his palm. He set it to the piece of maple, and with a long, steady motion, shaved off a perfect paper-thin curl of wood. The sound was clean, the work was honest, and in the quiet solitude of his new life, he was free.